Thank you so much. Always difficult to follow such an inspiring session, but we had a great segue in understanding the fact that it's all about authentic leadership, right? So I think one of the few things we've been speaking about when we got together as a group is saying that, look, we have too many, as Pa Habibi's mentioned, there's a lot of data today, but is there enough insight? Sorry, I'm just missing a clicker. Oh, thank you. Always a good start. So yeah, I think, just to get right, as Esti said, what kind of leadership and what kind of impact we want to leave behind is something we look at when we look at the kind of metrics we are following. Today, I think, just a bit of a provocation before I hand the floor to the panelist, is that we have too much data, and as Gartner says, but we have very little insight, right? What we measure, what we find easy to convey and communicate as KPIs to our teams, and what we believe is going to help us grow as a leader. But sometimes we tend to ignore what is harder to measure, but these assets which build over a period of time. So easy to talk about, every meeting we go to is all about clicks, impressions, did the campaign work, is there lower funnel conversion, but we always measure ourselves quarter to quarter. We also know, unfortunately, as Fortune 500, CEOs and CMOs, the tenure is fast reducing. So is there enough conversation and focus in talking about, the metrics or what compounds or what assets we build over a period of time in terms of brand preference, customer quality and retention, trust, reputation, and advocacy? And of course, what is the long-term impact and what is the long-term growth we can bring to the table? So lastly, I would like, before we hand over the question, is that should we, not look at a few metrics, but look at a framework, right? We talk about, of course, revenue is important, right? We all have to live in the era where, we are going to be evaluated on what we deliver and what we bring to the table. So in terms of sales, conversion, margin, sell today is extremely important. But what is the value that compounds? Are we building enterprise value over a period of time? And today, I think if we focus and get the framework right, it's very important that we will be able to, create a lasting impact for the organization as leaders. So my first question to Pa Meyrick, actually. So measurement, I think, being in media, of course, measurement in marketing has evolved significantly. We talked about reach, frequency as the classic way, right? And now we have digital attribution from clicks and commerce and ROS. But how, you sit in a lot of meeting as leaders who have navigated multiple eras. We've been around the block for over 2 decades, right? What do you see is the shift in the conversation that is happening in rooms, and how are marketing leaders thinking about impact? What do you think is driving that shift? And of course, to you, Ibu, is how do you balance this shift, right?
Great, thanks, Sony. I think the biggest shift that we're seeing in marketing, it's no longer about how much attention an ad campaign buys, but instead it's more so about how much business value that marketing campaign will drive, right? So years ago, we sort of like to see it historically in 3 phases. Phase 1, it's just about, and all of these sort of 3 phases within the marketing funnel and the measurements, it still has the same outcome objective, which is bottom funnel conversions, but it differs in terms of how you get there. So in phase 1, we had that obsession, of course, with GRPs, CPMs, and whatnot. In the second phase, 10 years ago, when digital started coming along, it's about cost per clicks, cost per versions, and what. So I think optimistically now, it's, we are marketers, and we do have to still remember the poetry of marketing. It's not just about metrics and about numbers and conversions. It's not a direct science oftentimes within marketing, but it's by feel and what. But how we can quantify those feels and metrics to convert to bottom funnel conversions is how. So optimistically within phase 3, I think that what we've seen is more of an understanding in boardrooms, more support for the CMOs and the marketing teams, that to drive business value, it would take some form of instinctual measurements beyond just the numbers, right? So that's number 1. This is sort of, what we see in slide here is an amalgamation of many marketing seminars and talks that we've seen. But, a simple formula that is highly used within that shift of measuring is that data plus context with immense creativity will lead to those outcomes, those business outcomes that we are targeted with and challenged with day to day as marketers. Yeah.
And do you see that consistently in every meeting you go to, or it's little more ad hoc than you would like?
Some a bit later than usual, but it's catching up towards that trend for sure. Yes.
Ibu, what do you feel as sitting on the other side of the table?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for us in the FMCG industry or many other industry, marketing is never about only communications and media.
Right.
It's much bigger than that. Means that marketing is actually the center of the demand creations where it lies from propositions, beyond just promotions, packaging, price, product, place, where to be able to be successful, you need to be able to winning in those pieces, not only just you have money and then you can buy attention from people. So I give you some examples. If you have money, actually it's quite easy for you to spend money, in a way that you can put it in quantitatively, means that you buy reach, you buy frequency. However, your product is actually not good enough. Then at some point of time, people will understand and then people will start trying your product or your brands. And then finally they realize it's not good and they will not come back again. So again, it's not successful as well. Same, you have good product, you have good marketing, and then in any way you are not able to create the right pricing. You are not able to distribute that massively, for example. Then when people try to look for your product, then they couldn't find it. At the end, they also not buying your product. So what I'm trying to say here is that marketing measurement needs to have a holistic approach. Not only just a media perspective, but also to the other piece. So I'll just give some examples here. Just look at the slides. There are points that if you're designing your brand or your product, you need to also question whether you actually have been able to answer all of this. For example, in product, is your product good enough if we benchmark to other competitions in the market? Because right now, to be honest with you, consumers are smarter. Consumers are having a lot of choices. Competitors are not standing still. If you don't get it, then obviously they can choose other options as well. So your product needs to also be stand out, And then whether your product or your offers is actually relevant and trendy enough that you offer for consumers, you need to be able to adapt quickly. Not only in product per se, but also in channels, for example. If the channel shifts are happening, if the media touch point are happening, then you'll be able to turn your product into more agile and more relevant for consumers. Propositions. We're not building brand for only like 1 or 2 years. We want the brand that are lasting forever, across generations. So have you been able to create a product or brands that are valuable enough for consumers, for people to understand and emotionally connect to your brand? That's something that you also need to measure. And then, for example, like pricing, like I said earlier, price is very important. In this economy, if you don't price it correctly, then obviously they will not buy it, right? And then whether you have the comment to price higher or people will not see it as a value for money. Whether the pricing that you design for your product or your brand are able to translate it in the market with the strategic pricing that you have designed earlier. So those metrics are also important to be measured as well. Promotions, for example, we're touching about a media, we're touching about promotions quantitatively, But also we're looking at the shifted in the channels. We're talking about digitalizations. People not only talking about traditional media, now they're shifted into more digitals. Have we able to also answering that platform that are relevant for consumers? Social conversations. Have your brand or your product are also able to become involved in the social conversations that the consumers are not been talking about? Aside from that also, quantitatively, right? Qualitatively, are you also able to communicate that clearly, relevantly, and also good enough for people to understand? Packaging, touch a little bit on that one. Packaging, like I said, consumer have many options. Is your packaging able to communicate your propositions clearly, despite many things that are happening in the point of sales, right? So will your packaging also good enough to be able to stand out, to be able to find people, your products, and also good enough to communicate in that one? The last journey is actually place. That's where the last journey of the consumer buying pattern, means that you need to be able to also reach where consumers are there. There's a quote saying that follow the people and then the money will follow. That means that you need to be able to predict where consumers are moving, then place your product in it, means that then obviously the consumers, the money anyway will follow. So in summary, the shift that marketing needs to be aware of is that we need to be winning in marketing games are important to win in many pieces, in all the pieces, not only like one part on one piece. Like I said, because consumers are smarter, consumer has many options, and competitor will not only just stand in still.
So Ibu, I think that's a great foundational framework and a blueprint when you're launching brands, right? As the brand, takes off and it builds up, what within these 6 P's do you think we should constantly monitor and make sure we're competitive on?
Yes, of course. Because like I said, you can be very good in product, you can be very good in propositions, for example, but then some other people are offering their more affordable things, for example. Then people start seeing the relevancy are shifted. Then what I say is that you need to be monitor rigorously on your piece in all the marketing aspect, and then see whether you're good enough, you're competitive enough to be able to win in the market.
Great, thank you so much. Meyrick, back to you. As a co-founder of City Vision, you've built a business at the intersection of media, technology, and brand impact. From that position, sitting across hundreds of brand conversations, what patterns do you see in the most forward-thinking marketing leaders? What marketing leaders are redefining what effective media actually means? And what separates the leaders from the rest? We already know that some of these campaigns actually create immeasurable impact, right? But some of them just fall at a finish line. So how would you say that, what is the marketing team's thinking or leadership thinking which is different, which ensures success or better impact?
It sort of builds on what Amaryllis mentioned earlier. Follow the people and the money will follow, right? So I think the brands that have won in their market shares have claimed the top spot within cultural relevance, right? So it's not, I think, building off of what Amaryllis was mentioning earlier in terms of following the people and where they are, but following them with something that resonates so you can build that marketing connection. And oftentimes the way to do that is to study our customers and what matters to them culturally. Owning cultural moments, I think, is key, right? So I'd like to share maybe a few case studies from different industries, which may be relevant for different parts of the audiences as well, right? I think we have a slide on the next slide. Right? So, for example, within the financial space, the case study is of a bank that wanted to own the cultural moment, and so they were the ones, who BCA brought in the weekend to Indonesia. So what they did here was plaster the weekend and this cultural moment, and they wanted to own New York Times Square. So this was on the back of a campaign, a global campaign, because the weekend had their concerts around the world in Times Square in Shinjuku. And in Indonesia, applying this, they wanted to apply it all throughout Sudirman. So paint Sudirman red, paint Times Square red, paint Shinjuku red, and paint Sudirman red here. Another case study that we have, if we go to the next slide, this is something within a different industry. It's a local cosmetics company, right? And Pure, right? It's owning the moment. When it's hot, use sunscreen. It's a very simple premise and a simple value proposition. So owning the moment when it's hot and when it's relevant to sell more sunscreen and to build that connection. So what NPure did here was design 3D installations within, let's say, bus shelters, and during car-free days, reminding the Indonesian population the importance of sunscreen for skin health, right? So again, owning that relevant moment. I think we have one more example here on the next slide. Yep. In Ramadan, we see a lot of our, FMCG brands, perhaps.
Sorry, I think we're losing on time, so let's just get the last question.
We can skip to the last question.
Great
so
work. I think, culture is a perfect segue for Ibu because, with Magnum Cafe, which was the iconic first experiential thing. So Magnum is Magnum and its portfolio is a dynamic cultural, iconic brands you have, right? But as a president director, you have a different seat at the table now, right? How do you think about building measurement philosophy across the team that honors both long-term brand building, since you are, you have iconic global brands, and also ensure that we're meeting targets and, making sure that the business is fighting in the right competitive context, as you said?
Yeah. So I think by building brands or building our company is actually you're not building for only 1 or 2 years. You want to build your business is actually longer enough across generations. How to be able to do that? You also need to shift your mindset. Yeah, it's not about a sprint journey, but think about like a marathon runner. What marathon runner means is that you need the pace and the energy to able to fuel your pace to be able to reach your destination. What does it mean? So let me share a little bit from my slide. It's going to be quick. That we need to have the balance between a short-term delivery versus the long-term investment. Short-term delivery is the one that are actually paying our salary, paying our bill. So as a marketing leader, as a business leader, you also needs to remember that you're contributing about revenue and margin delivery. When you're creating an innovations, you need to be able to see whether your product or your offers is actually able to create revenue growth as well as the margin that are needed for the company to live in. Then every spending that you spend needs to see whether it's also return on investment, whether the payback is actually within the framework that are able to create for another investment. Consumer and channel shift, you need to be able to create that and adapt that quickly. At the end, is really about how you connect with today's world, adapt quickly from AI, from digital. That will help to generate growth and revenue to fuel your pace and your growth moving forward. At the same time, you also need to also think the balance about the long-term investment. Means that what is that? And when you're offering a product or when you're building a brand, you want that brand to last for many, many years, yeah? So you need to build an equity where brands are also being invested enough in terms of the investment, awareness, but also the right message across the year. That will also help to build your loyalty, your consumer retention and trust, build your corporate reputations. Also, don't forget to building a future capability. Like I said, people are evolving, channels are evolving, touch points are evolving. We need to also build that. Digitalization, we spoke about it a lot. AI, are your brands and your product and your business are ready enough to be able to embrace that? Last but most importantly is also right team and right culture. As a business leader, as a marketing leader, you need to build the right team because people is always the asset of the company. When your people grow, the business will grow. So in summary, to be able to do that, to have a more sustainable business, you need to have the short-term delivery, which is short-term balance versus the long-term investment, the one that can pay your money monthly, and also the one that can also fuel across generations.
I think we're far into stoppage time now. I can hear a lot of people. Thank you. I think, it's great. The fact is that we're all looking at a framework, not only looking at short-term metrics and, having an exhaustive dashboard. And we all live with dashboards, so I'm so excited. The fact that we haven't yet gone almost through this conversation without talking about AI and token usage as one of the KPIs, but great. Yeah, so thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.